from them. My favorite one, of course, is my own guru, Baba Muktananda. But tonight, I'm doing a program I do maybe twice a year, and that is Zen Buddhism. I've always been a great fan of Zen. I love the way Zen is. Zen is about gurus and disciples. Zen is about learning in a practical way and attaining the goal through practice and through meditation. And that's a very good approach to meditation. But tonight I thought I'd do something a little different, because Zen goes back. Zen, there was, Buddhism was, grew up in India around 500 BC, 500 years before Jesus. And then a monk named Bodhidharma brought Buddhism to China. And then certain Japanese monks went to China and learned from the Chinese practices of a precursor of Zen called Chan. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but well, that'll do. And they brought it back, and it became Zen in Japan. But it's all a straight line, goes back, and the source of all of that is the Buddha. So I thought I'd do a little bit on the life of the Buddha, and then to my favorite Zen practitioner, Suzuki Roshi. So the Buddha was born in North India, maybe it's in Nepal now, I'm not sure, but he was the prince of a small kingdom, and he had a very charmed youth. He had everything, but the astrologist told his father that if he found out about the harsh realities of life, he would leave his throne and become a monk. And that's the worst thing his father could think of, because he was going to inherit the throne of this little kingdom. So he kept him away from all the harsh realities of life. And then one day he got his charioteer to take him outside the walls of his palace and around the streets of the surrounding villages, and he saw the harsh realities. He saw, famously, an old person, a funeral procession, and someone who was sick. So he became aware that there was old age, disease, and death. And he asked his charioteer, what are these things? He says, oh, that's old age, disease, and death. He says, well, why do these people have it? He says, everybody gets it. He says, will I get it? He said, yes, everyone. No one is immune to these things. And the Buddha, being a very high and refined sensibility, said, well, if that's the case, that there's old age, disease, and death, I can't live my life as though these things don't exist. I have to get to the bottom of it and solve the existential problem of life. I have to see how I can find happiness despite this awful fact. So he ran away. And he left, much to his family's chagrin. And he went off to find the truth. And he found various teachers of the time. There are different kinds of yogis and gurus around, and he studied with them. And he tried different doctrines on at the time. And finally, the story goes, he didn't find success anywhere. And finally he decided he would sit down under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya in India, and he would not. It's called in the story. It's called Buddha's resolve. He sat there and he said, "I will not leave my seat until I attain supreme enlightenment." That's resolution, isn't it? Imagine that if you decided to sit in your seat and say, I'm not going to leave here until I crack the code of the universe. I break through my suffering. I break through my ignorance, I break through my worry and my fear, and I attain enlightenment. He'd be sitting a long time, probably. He'd probably get up quickly and turn on Foxtel, Netflix. No. But anyway, supposedly the Buddha did that, and he sat there, and he went through a powerful inner struggle, and then he attained enlightenment. So here we have a photograph of him sitting under the Bodhi tree, and he's obviously attained enlightenment because he got a halo at that point, and he's serene, and he has become the Buddha. And then, so I'm going to tell you about what happened after that. It's after his enlightenment, he sat under the Bodhi tree and he basked in bliss. And during this time, he was receiving inner teachings from the non-self, from the self, we would say. And he understood about the path, he understood his new state of consciousness. And while he was sitting there, two merchants were traveling by on business, and they happened to see him, and they could see, by just looking at him, that he was a radiant being in a high spiritual state. He was just radiating light. And they decided to learn from him. They took refuge in him and his teachings, and they became his first non-monastic followers. And they asked for instruction, and he gave it to them. Then he started to think, should I teach or not? This was a big watershed in the Buddha's life. He thought about what he'd learned during his up to his enlightenment, and what he'd seen, what he understood, and he saw that the truth that he'd attained was very subtle, hard to grasp, hard to see, fantastically excellent, but inaccessible to the normal mind, to mere logic, and it was so subtle that only the rare person could understand it. This is what he thought. He said, I don't know, it's so difficult that what's the use of my going out to teach? So should he teach it and reveal it to other people? And he had a lot of doubts about it and struggled within himself. And in the text, they say that he had a conversation with God, Brahma. We don't have to take that literally. But this is a dialogue that comes down from the Pali texts. And we'll cut down to the essentials here. There's two parts of this struggle. One is the desire just to be left alone and bask in his own bliss and not be troubled by having to teach others. And the other side is compassion, altruism, the desire to help everyone. He saw that this could be of help. So this was a struggle. And so in this dialogue, the Buddha says, this world delights in the pleasures of the senses. My teaching aims at the renunciation of all attachments. See, he saw that you had to renounce attachments. Now that's a very difficult teaching for people to get, isn't it? So he thought, I can't teach that. And the destruction of craving. If I were to teach this doctrine, which goes against the stream, and people did not understand me, that would be a weariness and a trouble for me. And Brahma said, the world will perish if the fully enlightened one does not decide to teach his doctrine. May the exalted one therefore teach it. There are some beings with little dust in their eyes. There are some who are ready for this teaching, a few. If they do not hear the Dharma is the path, the law, the path, they will be lost. But if they hear the Dharma, they will attain to liberation. Another one, student, Roshi, what is the difference between you and me? That's a bold question, isn't it? Suzuki Roshi. There is difference and no difference. That's very Zen. Whatever they ask you, you say, there is difference and no difference. That is why we practice together. Because there is some difference, we practice together. And because we are not different, we practice together. If you are completely different from me, there is no reason why you should practice with me. And if we are completely the same, there is no reason why we should practice together. That's very wonderful. I remember once Aurobindo was teaching someone, and he told him how to go about his sadhana, control his mind, and so on. And the student said, well, I can't do that. It's easy for you because you're a great siddha. You're a great being. And Aurobindo said, you're making my life useless because you're denying my purpose. The truth is that I was like you. And anyone can do this if you just follow it. I wasn't anything special. If I became special, it's because I followed the teaching. So he says, we're similar and we're not similar. Because we're different, we practice our way. And because we are originally the same, we practice our way. Not different and different. Because we're essentially the same, we can practice. And because we're different, there's something for you to grow in. This kind of thing, he says, is not easy to understand. Traditional practice starts from the source of the teaching, which is absolute, which is non-duality. We would say everything begins in the self, pure consciousness. Everything begins with consciousness. Usually you're attracted to something through your eyes or nose, through sight or smell or some form, but not through this original source of the teaching. So the self is beyond the senses. It's even beyond the mind. It can't be expressed, but it can be directly experienced. He says the original source is not something that can be described. So we say tongueless speech. We're talking about something that is impossible to talk about. That's why it is called not lecture. We can explain this with words, but we're explaining what is beyond words. So we call these words the finger pointing to the moon. This is the delightfully Zen thing. This is the finger pointing to the moon. If you understand what the moon is,